All right, so let's start this broadcast with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. More than a year on, Ukraine is still fighting its way out of a war that Russia started. The country has lost, regained and lost again parts of its territory. But the fighting continues. A big catalyst in Ukraine holding its ground is, of course, the weapons and the armaments supplied by the West. The Western arms are keeping the lights on in Kyiv, and now Ukraine is trying to turn the defense into offense. A counter-offensive operation has been in the works for a very long time. The planning, of course, has been ongoing. The Pentagon documents had hinted at a similar strategy. Now, if the Pentagon papers are to be believed, then the offensive is planned to begin by the 30th of April. Now, Kyiv says that it is nearly ready to launch a huge ground assault. Now, earlier in the month, the Prime Minister had also indicated that a counter-offensive could, of course, be expected in summer. And experts say that the operation could, of course, be delayed to autumn because good weather is key for an operation of this scale. Now, Ukraine will try to maneuver its own missions, but they'll also be trying to get ahead of the Russian attempts to fortify their own positions. The ultimate goal is to retake all territory that once belonged to Ukraine, including the annexed peninsula of Crimea. Russia has hedged its bets with its winter offensive. The kind of missile attacks that hit Uman and Dnipro today, Ukraine saw these kind of waves of attacks almost weeks in the winter. Kyiv made swift gains throughout the second half of 2022, but has kept its forces back on the defensive for the past 5 months. What this has done is Russia taking over nearly about a fifth of Ukrainian territory. But now, the war at this moment is at a critical juncture. Ukrainian troops have been training at their western bases. The arsenal is full with new tanks and weapons given by the West. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has said that more than 98% of the combat vehicles promised to Ukraine have now been delivered.
Overall, through the contact group led by the United States, NATO allies and partners have provided unprecedented support to Ukraine. More than 98% of the combat vehicles promised to Ukraine have already been delivered. That means over 1,550 armored vehicles, 230 tanks and other equipment, including vast amounts of ammunition. In total, we have trained and equipped more than 9 new Ukrainian armored brigades. This will put Ukraine in a strong position to continue to retake occupied territory.
The Ukrainian soldiers are now training to reform new brigades and to learn how to use new weapons sent by the Allies. These soldiers have all seen combat as they previously had taken part in heavy pitched battles to defend their territory, including in the eastern city of Bakhmut. They're now part of a bigger brigade that is now one of the many that is being reformed after suffering heavy casualties before being sent back to the front lines. Now, clearly, Europe's largest armed conflict since the end of the Second World War is poised to enter into a new phase in the coming weeks. So Kyiv and its Western military allies have got their eyes on one thing, and that is on how to shift the dynamic of this war. And also to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, can be expected in this much talked about Ukrainian counteroffensive, we're being joined in by Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, who is a former advisor to Defence Minister of Ukraine and also a fellow of the Baltic Security Foundation. Mr. Grant, thank you very much indeed, sir, for taking your time out and speaking to us here on WION. And the question that I want to begin with is this. You know, a Ukrainian counteroffensive has been in the works for a pretty long time. The spring is here. The counteroffensive was supposed to start in spring. When do you expect that we would see a full-fledged counteroffensive by Ukraine?
I think the answer is when they're ready, because it would be foolish for them to actually to cross the start line if they haven't actually got themselves completely ready. They haven't got all the equipment yet, although Stoltenberg actually mentioned 98%. That isn't quite true. There are still tanks and armored vehicles to come from other countries that haven't arrived yet. But I don't think that those will actually be part of the main force at the moment. But it does just show that they've got more still to come. There's a lot of preparation that's got to take place. I mean, one thing is you've actually got to move all this equipment and people to the front line where they're going to do it. And they've got to decide actually where is the weakest point of the front line. And there are several areas where Russia has been attacking around Bakhmut and in the area between Donetsk and Bakhmut, where the Russian forces have just been beaten back. And now they're actually quite weak there.
Right.
And then if you actually look south, weak there in many places as well. So, there are opportunities.
So when you talk that the Russian forces are weak in the south, are you referring to the Crimean Peninsula? Because for the Russians, the Crimean Peninsula is quite clearly the red line, which could escalate this conflict to levels that we've not witnessed before.
Oh, well, I don't think that's true. I mean, let's not just moving away from Crimea for 1 second. Above Crimea was where I was talking about, towards Melitopol. I mean, there are hundreds of trenches and there are many mines, and mines could be the killer in this. But a trench is only a piece of earthwork. Without a trained soldier inside it, right. It's actually, it's almost a coffin. Now, Crimea, red line, who said it's a red line? I haven't heard anybody say it's a red line, apart from Russia, and they've been saying things are red line right. since the beginning of the war, and they haven't done anything.
All right, very interesting. And also, Colonel Grant, tell us a bit about what the Russian strategy is, because last week we saw drone strikes that targeted Kyiv after a lull of nearly about a month, and early this morning we saw a barrage of missile strikes again which targeted the Ukrainian capital. Why is it that Russia at this moment feels compelled to strike the heart of Kyiv after a lull of almost more than a month?
Well, firstly, they're in trouble, and they know they're in trouble. Because, whatever they're doing is not actually having much effect. Yes, they are moving forward, but they're not moving forward but anything like the amount they should do compared to the resources they've lost, both in people and tanks. So I think that this is just a slight strategic change to remind everybody that Russia is there. And maybe it's an attempt to try and pull Ukraine into a ceasefire. But that isn't going to happen. The public is well used to these attacks, and it just brings more hate and it brings more determination on the Ukrainian side to make sure they win the battle.
Well, last question to you, Colonel Grant, is of course about reports which state that Ukraine last Sunday tried to assassinate Vladimir Putin using a drone. But unfortunately, that drone, of course, did not make it to its target, and that drone actually fell nearly about 19 kilometers short of Moscow. What do you make of these reports that state that the Ukrainian forces are trying to assassinate Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think this comes into the same basket as the attacks in and around Donetsk, which are clearly done by the Russians, not actually done by the Ukrainians. My view is that if the Ukraine is intent on killing Vladimir Putin, they will do so. Because it's too serious for them to play around with. Let's just say that. They wouldn't use one drone, they'd use 5 or 6.
All right, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Colonel Grant, for joining us and getting us all those insights there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.